One night, I overheard my wife talking to our neighbor. She said once I'm out of the picture, they'll be free to live the life they've planned. I couldn't believe it. Hey there. Welcome to today's story. What are you up to right now? Take a moment, get comfortable, and get ready to dive into the story. Today, we have a story where the main character faces something that might feel familiar, maybe something you've gone through or something you can relate to. Have you ever been in a situation where trust was broken and you had to take matters into your own hands? Well, this story is all about that, and I can't wait for you to hear how it all unfolds. Stick around until the end to see how the character overcomes it all. And before we dive in, I'd really appreciate it if you could help me reach 1,000 subscribers soon. Your support keeps me going and motivates me to bring you more exciting stories. Thanks a lot. Let's jump in. It was one of those days where everything felt off. I had just finished a long day at work, and something about the evening just didn't sit right. The wind had picked up outside, rustling the trees like a warning signal. The moment I stepped into the house, the quietness felt wrong. I expected to hear the usual hum of life. My wife, Sophie, bustling about, preparing dinner, the TV playing in the background. But there was nothing. The power had gone out earlier in the day, a common occurrence around here, especially during storm season. Sophie had mentioned it earlier when I called to check in. I didn't think anything of it. But as I stood in the dark hallway, I noticed something unusual, voices coming from the kitchen. I froze. It was Sophie's voice, but it wasn't the tone I was used to. Her laughter was high-pitched, almost flirtatious, as if she was trying to impress someone. I heard another voice, deep, masculine, unfamiliar. My curiosity piqued. I quietly made my way closer, staying just out of sight. I had to be sure. That's when I heard it. Sophie and her companion were talking about a plan and how everything was set for next month. Once the insurance money comes through, we'll finally be able to live the life we've been waiting for, she said, the words dripping with cold, calculated intent. I felt like the world had just tilted beneath me. The reality of what I was hearing hit me like a ton of bricks. Sophie and this man, Daniel, I later found out, were planning something I wasn't meant to be a part of. Something that didn't just involve betrayal, it involved my life. I've never been the type of guy to jump to conclusions. That's just not me. I mean, sure, I've had my fair share of doubts about things over the years, but murder? That's a line I never thought I'd even imagine, let alone face. Sophie and I, well, we've been together for nearly 7 years, married for 5. We've had our ups and downs, sure. Who doesn't? But we've always managed to work through things. We were good together, or so I thought. But now everything felt off. Like I was walking through some foggy version of my own life, unsure of what was real and what was just some twisted version of the truth playing out in front of me. At first, I kept telling myself that I was overthinking things. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was just looking for problems where there weren't any. But deep down, a knot kept tightening in my stomach every time Sophie and I interacted. It wasn't her usual self. She wasn't my Sophie. I didn't know if it was the pressure of everything, or maybe even the stress of our lives catching up with her. But it didn't feel like we were two people in a marriage anymore. It felt like we were strangers living in the same house. And I had no idea how long that had been going on. But even if my instincts were screaming at me to do something about it, to confront her, I didn't act rashly. No, I'm not the kind of person who makes scenes, who jumps into a confrontation without thinking things through. It's just not my style. I'm a problem solver. I don't burn bridges unless I'm sure they need to be burned. So, I decided to take a step back and process everything. I needed to gather evidence, and I couldn't risk confronting them yet. Not until I knew for sure. If I went in guns blazing and accused her of something I wasn't entirely sure about, I'd just be handing them the upper hand. No, I couldn't do that. I needed to be smart. I needed to be patient. The days that followed felt like a blur. Every moment I spent in that house with Sophie felt like I was living someone else's life. It wasn't the life I had planned for us. She became this shadow of the person I married. She was still physically there. Still went through the motions, still cooked dinner, still smiled at me with that half-hearted expression that didn't reach her eyes. But emotionally, it was like I was talking to a stranger. I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Sophie was distant, colder than usual. She would smile at me sometimes, but it was always forced, like she was putting on a show for my benefit. And then there were those moments when she'd be too nice, almost too affectionate, as if she was overcompensating for something. But it never felt real. It felt like a performance, like she was trying to convince me, and maybe herself, that everything was fine. The weirdest part? She started asking me questions I didn't understand. Questions that made me feel like I was being watched. She'd ask about my schedule, questions about trips I hadn't planned, about things I hadn't told her I was doing. One night, everything changed. I had no idea that something as ordinary as hearing Sophie on the phone would be the thing that pushed me over the edge. I had just finished a long day of work and was looking forward to a relaxing evening, but fate had other plans. Sophie thought I was in the shower, like I had told her I would be, but I wasn't in there. Instead, I had quietly slipped into the next room, sitting in the darkness with nothing but the faint sound of the shower running in the background. My heart was pounding for reasons I couldn't quite explain yet, but that changed when I heard her voice. It was soft, almost pleading, with a desperation I hadn't heard before. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then I heard it again. She was speaking to Daniel, and the words coming out of her mouth made my blood run cold. "The time is almost here," Sophie said, her voice low but clear. "The accident will happen when he goes on that fishing trip next weekend. It'll be perfect, no one will suspect a thing. His death will look like a random accident and we'll get the payout. I'll be free, Daniel. We'll finally have everything we've been planning." I froze. My stomach churned as I processed what I had just heard. My wife, the woman I had trusted with my life, was planning to have me killed. And not just any death, but a staged accident, all for the sake of money. It was sickening, surreal, and my mind couldn't fully grasp the reality of it all. I wanted to scream, to burst into that room and confront them both, but I didn't. That would have been a mistake. No, I needed to think this through carefully. I had to be smarter than them. I had been living in the same house with Sophie, sharing a bed, a life, and all the memories that came with it. Yet, for all those years, I never once thought she would be capable of something like this. It was like a horrible dream, one that you can't wake up from, and yet you're fully aware of everything happening around you. My world was crumbling, but I wasn't going to let them have the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Not yet. I knew what I had to do. I had to play it cool, gather more evidence, and stay in control. I couldn't make any rash decisions. I couldn't confront them and risk tipping them off. I had to make them believe that I had no idea what was going on. I needed them to think I was still the oblivious husband they had been manipulating all along. So I started setting my own traps. Little things at first, things that wouldn't raise suspicion. I began leaving the house at odd hours, making phone calls without explaining them, and planting tiny seeds of doubt. Nothing too obvious, nothing that would make them realize I was onto them, but just enough to make them second-guess themselves, to wonder if they had been caught. The paranoia would be their downfall, I was certain of it. I knew I had to be methodical. One wrong move and they would know I was onto them. But if I kept them on edge, kept them guessing, they would make mistakes. They'd slip up eventually. I started by pretending to be the same person they thought I was. Oblivious, trusting, and totally unaware of their plan. I went back to my routine, acting like everything was fine. I even joked with Sophie about things that didn't matter, just to keep her calm, to keep her from thinking anything was wrong. But every time I did, I felt like I was wearing a mask, and the longer I wore it, the more suffocating it became. Then I began to push the boundaries. I would leave the house for a few hours, even though I didn't have any reason to. I'd come back at odd times, making sure Sophie was home to see me, to make her wonder where I'd been, why I'd left without telling her. I'd ask her casual questions about her day, making her think I was still the same curious husband. But inside, my mind was racing, calculating my next move. I also started paying closer attention to her habits. Sophie was always on her phone, more than usual. And when she thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch her texting with Daniel. Just a few words here and there, but enough to make me realize they were still communicating, still working together. There was one moment in particular that stood out. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, when I saw Sophie's phone light up. She quickly grabbed it, her face flushing as she typed a response. She was careful to hide the screen, but I had seen enough. It wasn't just her behavior that changed. The atmosphere at home became tense, charged with an energy I couldn't ignore. There was a constant undercurrent of anxiety that Sophie tried to mask with small talk or fake cheerfulness. But I could see through it. I noticed the way she would look at me, just a little too long, like she was trying to gauge whether I suspected something, or if I was still clueless. It wasn't just her that I had to watch. Daniel, too, started acting strange whenever I was around. Whenever he'd come over to borrow a tool or ask for help with something, his eyes would dart nervously around, and he'd fidget more than usual. I could tell that he was trying to be subtle, but the guilt was written all over his face. The more I watched him, the more I realized just how much he was involved. He wasn't just some clueless neighbor. No, he was an active participant in this twisted game. But what worried me the most was the silence. Sophie wasn't talking as much. The plans, the conversations I had overheard, they were all happening in the background now, like they were waiting for the right moment to strike. It felt like I was walking through a minefield, and at any moment, everything could explode. As I moved forward with my plan, I started taking more calculated risks. I began making phone calls in the middle of the day, when Sophie would be around to overhear them. I would talk to friends or colleagues about vague things, work, a trip, nothing that would raise suspicion. But it wasn't about what I was saying. It was about her hearing me. I wanted to make sure that she thought I was growing suspicious, even though I wasn't. I wanted her to feel like the walls were closing in on her. Each time I left the house, I'd make sure to leave something out of place. A coffee cup, a book, a random object on the counter. Small things, just enough to make Sophie question whether I was really just going out for a casual errand or if I was following her every move. I knew that if I could get her to second-guess herself, to wonder if I was onto her, she'd start making mistakes. And mistakes in this game were the key to winning. But despite all my efforts, I wasn't sure how long I could keep up the act. I had never felt more alone in my life. The woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was now my enemy. And I had no idea how to stop it. I couldn't confront her directly, not yet. But I had to play the game, I had to make my moves carefully. Soon enough, they would slip up. I just had to wait. For the next week, everything started to escalate. Sophie was acting even more jittery than usual, and her behavior was starting to get under my skin in ways I hadn't expected. It was subtle at first. Small things like her glancing nervously at her phone, biting her lip whenever I asked her about her day, avoiding eye contact when I asked simple, innocuous questions. I could see the anxiety in her eyes, and it was like a silent alarm going off in my head. The more she tried to hide it, the more obvious it became. It was like she was trying to convince herself that everything was fine, but I could tell she was unraveling. One evening, as I was helping myself to a glass of water, I noticed Sophie's purse left open on the kitchen counter. I hesitated for a moment, just a moment, and then I reached for it. It wasn't like I was snooping. It wasn't the first time I had seen her purse carelessly left out like this, but tonight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My fingers brushed against a small, unmarked bottle tucked into the corner of her bag. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled it out, turning it over in my hand. It was a strange bottle, no label, no markings, nothing. My mind raced. What was this? Why would she keep something like this hidden in her purse? I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. I knew Sophie would be back in a few minutes, and I didn't want to tip her off just yet. When she came back into the room, I was casually inspecting the bottle, pretending it was just another odd thing I had found lying around. As soon as Sophie saw me holding it, her reaction was immediate. She stiffened, her eyes darting to the bottle, and she quickly grabbed it from my hands. "It's just vitamins," she said, her voice defensive. But there was something about the way she said it that made my stomach twist. She was too quick to react. Her face flushed slightly, but it was the way her hands trembled as she put the bottle back into her purse that told me everything. She was hiding something. I knew it. I didn't push it any further. I didn't have to. I had learned everything I needed to know. The bottle didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Sophie had lied to me. And I knew there was something far deeper going on than I had imagined. But I didn't let on. I didn't confront her. That was the moment I decided it was time to move forward. I had already started making my move, but now I had to take it further. I wasn't going to make the mistake of acting rashly. I needed to be patient, calculated, and precise. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about protecting myself. I had been tracking everything, every suspicious action, every cryptic message, every tiny piece of evidence that connected Sophie to Daniel. They weren't as careful as they thought. I wasn't just sitting around waiting to be killed. I wasn't going to let them take me down without a fight. I was preparing for war, and I was getting ready to make my move. I reached out to a lawyer, a discreet one, someone who specialized in protecting clients from situations exactly like mine. I wasn't stupid. I knew what was at stake. Sophie and Daniel might have thought they were running the show, but they hadn't seen what I was capable of yet. I started gathering the tools I'd need to protect myself. Things like tracking accounts, setting up secure communications, and most importantly, securing my assets before they could get their hands on any of it. The lawyer helped me draft a plan, one that would give me the upper hand. I started moving money into accounts that Sophie wouldn't be able to access, accounts that I could control. Everything was getting moved around. If they thought they could play me, they were sorely mistaken. I wasn't going to make it easy for them. No, I would make them regret underestimating me. I wasn't just changing passwords and redirecting funds. I was also setting up cameras around the house. Small ones, hidden in corners, disguised in objects Sophie wouldn't even think twice about. I needed to gather evidence. The more I watched, the more I would understand about what they were planning and how they were operating. They were getting careless, and I was getting closer to catching them in the act. Every day felt like a balancing act. I couldn't tip my hand. I couldn't let Sophie know that I knew what was going on. I had to keep up appearances, act like the oblivious husband. It was harder than it seemed. Sophie wasn't the same woman I had married. It was like she had slipped into this new persona, this stranger who didn't belong in the life we'd built together. I found myself watching her more closely, studying every move she made, looking for any sign of guilt. The tension was palpable. She was walking on eggshells around me, trying to pretend nothing was wrong, but I could see through it. The house felt different now. Every room was charged with an energy I couldn't shake. It was like I was living in a constant state of alertness, always waiting for the next move. Every little sound, every creak in the floorboards, every shift in the air made me question whether Sophie knew I was onto her. Was she watching me as closely as I was watching her? I didn't know, but I had to assume she was. She had to be. I was preparing for the worst, but I wasn't going to let them take me down without a fight. They wanted to turn my life into a game. A deadly game where the stakes were my life. But I wasn't going to play by their rules. This was my game now, and I was going to win. I started to gather everything I could, every piece of evidence, every suspicious moment, every misstep that Sophie or Daniel made. I wasn't just gathering information. I was building a case that would bring them down once I was ready. I was in control now, and nothing was going to stop me from making sure they would pay for what they'd done. For now, I kept everything quiet. But the game was changing. The tension was building. The trap was set. And soon, they would make the mistake that would expose everything.
Hey, are you finding the story interesting so far? If you are, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can continue the adventure together. The best part is just ahead.
2 weeks passed, and I was growing restless. The calm before the storm was getting harder to endure. Every day felt like a ticking clock, every hour dragging on as if time itself were conspiring against me. I could feel it in my bones. I knew what was coming, and Sophie had no idea that the tables had already turned. I had outsmarted them. It was only a matter of time before I made my move. The days were long, and the nights felt even longer. I spent countless hours just watching Sophie, her every movement, every word she said, every nervous twitch she made when she thought I wasn't looking. She had no idea that I was no longer the same person she thought she was deceiving. I was done being the passive, unsuspecting husband. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. One evening, after making sure Sophie was preoccupied with some trivial task in the living room, I slipped out of the house. The cold air hit me as I walked down the street, but I didn't feel it. My mind was consumed with thoughts of what was about to happen. I had to meet Daniel. It was time to confront him, or at least to get him to talk. I needed more proof. I needed to hear it from him. I spent hours at that dive bar. A dimly lit, worn-down place that smelled of stale beer and regret. The perfect setting for the conversation I was about to have. I wasn't sure how this was going to play out, but I knew I had to get Daniel to open up. I had to make him spill everything, every last detail about his twisted little plan with Sophie. I could already feel the tension building inside me. When Daniel walked in, I saw it immediately. The haze in his eyes, the unsteady gait, the flushed cheeks. He was drunk. Perfect. This was going to be easier than I thought. I watched him as he stumbled toward the bar, ordered a drink, and took a seat. He was too far gone to put up any resistance. The alcohol would make him careless. I just needed to nudge him in the right direction. I waited until he was halfway through his second drink before I leaned over and casually mentioned Sophie. I made sure to speak her name like it was just another topic of small talk. He perked up, his eyes momentarily sharpening with recognition, but I could see the fog of alcohol still clouding his mind. "So, how's Sophie been doing? She seems different lately?" I said, making it sound like the most innocuous question in the world. Daniel's eyes flickered for a moment, and then he chuckled darkly, a little too loudly for the quiet bar. He took a swig of his drink and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Yeah, well, Sophie's always been unpredictable." I kept my face neutral. "Unpredictable how?" He leaned in, slurring his words just a little. "She promised me the world, man. Once you're out of the picture, we're set. She'll finally be free. You won't be a problem anymore, and we can do whatever we want." I could feel my pulse quicken, but I didn't let it show. I kept my voice steady, leaning in slightly as if the conversation were just casual bar talk. "What do you mean by out of the picture?" He smiled again, this time more broadly, like he was letting me in on some big secret. "She promised me, once you're gone, it'll be easy. You're taking that fishing trip, right? It's the perfect opportunity. She's already got the insurance lined up, and once you're gone, well, we'll finally have everything we've been talking about. The life we deserve." Every word that came out of his mouth made me sick, but I didn't let him see my disgust. I knew this was what I needed to hear. This was the final confirmation that everything Sophie and Daniel had planned was real, and it was more than I could have ever imagined. I recorded it all. Every word, every slur of his voice, every confession. I knew this would be the evidence I'd need when the time came. It wasn't just about exposing Sophie anymore. It was about making sure they both paid for everything they'd done. By the time Daniel had finished his third drink, he was practically spilling his guts. He didn't even try to cover up his involvement in the scheme. He was too far gone to think about the consequences. I knew the more he talked, the more I had to distance myself from him. I couldn't let him suspect anything, and the longer I stayed, the more risk there was of him catching on. I paid the tab, made a casual exit, and made my way home. The entire time, I was replaying the conversation in my head. The anger was there, but it was controlled now. The truth was out. I had what I needed. All I had to do now was set the stage. When I got home, I made sure to make enough noise to announce my arrival. Sophie was exactly where I expected her to be, sitting on the couch, flipping through her phone. She looked up when she heard the door, and her face immediately shifted into that mask of concern. "You're home late," she said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the edge in her voice. I didn't answer her immediately. I just stood there for a moment, looking at her. She knew something was different. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't know what, but she could feel the shift in the air. I walked into the living room, sat down, and pulled my phone out of my pocket. I hit play on the recording I'd made.
The audio filled the space between us. Daniel's voice, slurred and disgusting, echoing in the stillness of the room. Sophie's face went white. She froze, her breath catching in her throat as she listened to the conversation unfold. The blood drained from her face, and her hand instinctively reached for the edge of the coffee table as if steadying herself. She had no idea what to say. When the recording finished, I looked at her. She was still staring at the screen, wide-eyed and silent. Her usual charm, her usual composure, was completely gone. I could see the panic starting to set in, but there was something strange in her expression. It wasn't just guilt or fear. It was resignation, as if she had already accepted what was coming. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't understand. I never meant for it to go this far. Daniel, he just pushed me into it. He said we had no choice. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I let her explain herself, even though every word was a lie. But here's the twist. She didn't break down in despair. She didn't beg for forgiveness. No, Sophie didn't even try to deny it. She simply admitted to the affair, to everything that had happened between her and Daniel. But when it came to the murder plot, she stopped short. I didn't plan the accident, she said, her voice shaking but firm. That was all Daniel. He said we had no choice, that it would all be easy. I couldn't say no to him. I didn't buy it. I wasn't buying anything she was saying anymore. It didn't matter. The truth was out. She had betrayed me in the most vile way possible. And now it was time for the consequences to catch up with her. I pulled out the divorce papers I had already signed and slid them across the table toward her. You've had your chance to make things right, Sophie. It's too late for that now. You can sign these, or you can face what's coming next. She stared at the papers, her hands trembling, but she didn't hesitate. Without a word, she reached for the pen. Her signature was swift, almost mechanical. She didn't look up once as she signed. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel any sense of victory. It was like I had just closed a chapter on something that was already dead. The person I thought I knew had been a lie the entire time. As she handed me the signed papers, she didn't say anything. There were no words of apology, no attempt at reconciliation. She just walked away out of my life for good. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. This was the end. Sophie signed the papers. It was over. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But even as the ink dried on that final piece of paper, something inside me knew it wasn't enough. Couldn't be enough. It wasn't just about getting her out of my life. It wasn't just about taking back my freedom. No, I needed more than that. I needed them to feel the weight of what they had done. I needed them to pay the price, because justice wasn't something I was willing to leave to chance. The house felt quieter now. The air around me seemed stiller, as though the walls were holding their breath, waiting for what came next. Sophie was gone, her things packed, her presence reduced to an absence I could almost touch. But even her departure didn't bring peace. It just felt unfinished. My heart was still heavy, burdened with the echoes of betrayal and the gnawing hunger for retribution. I couldn't move on until I knew that everything had unraveled for them. 2. Sophie may have thought she was leaving behind the wreckage of my life, but in truth, the damage was something I could rebuild. What I needed now was to destroy the world they'd built, the one they thought they could tear apart for their own gain. The first step was easy. I contacted Daniel's ex-wife. She was an unexpected ally, someone who knew exactly what he was capable of, even if she hadn't known about the affair. It was almost ironic. While Daniel had destroyed his own family, Sophie and I had built something that, on the surface, seemed unbreakable. That illusion was shattered now, and it was time for Daniel's ex-wife to know what he'd been hiding from her all these years. I sent her everything I knew. The emails, the texts, the recorded conversation with Daniel, his promise to Sophie about their future once I was gone. I held nothing back. I made sure to lay out the timeline, the details, the lies. I painted a picture of a man so consumed by greed and manipulation that he thought he could orchestrate my death without anyone noticing. I knew it was a risk. She could very well decide to ignore it or worse, side with him. But I couldn't let them get away with it. Not now. Not after everything. I remember sitting by the phone, waiting for her response. When it came, it was brief but direct. "I need proof," she said, and I knew right then that the floodgates had opened. Over the next few days, everything began to unravel for Daniel. His ex-wife, once she had the evidence, didn't hesitate to act. She contacted the authorities. She reached out to the people who could bring his shady dealings to light, and she started telling everyone she knew about the man Daniel had really become. It wasn't just about his affair with Sophie anymore. It was about the life he had built on lies, on deceit. People in his circle started distancing themselves from him, and the weight of his actions slowly crushed him. Meanwhile, Sophie's own unraveling was more personal. She wasn't a man who could face the public eye and go down in flames with a sense of dignity. No, she was a woman who thrived on her image, who cared deeply about how others saw her. But once the affair came to light and Daniel's treacherous actions were exposed, the cracks in her carefully constructed facade were too large to hide. Her friends, the ones who had turned a blind eye to her marriage, started questioning her. The people she had once entertained, impressed with her charm, now saw her as nothing more than a deceitful, desperate woman who would do anything to get ahead. Gossip spread like wildfire. Once pristine reputations were now tarnished, and Sophie was left to navigate a world where no one trusted her anymore. I could almost feel the satisfaction of it, the slow burn of their downfall, but the truth is, I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would. There was no sense of closure. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness inside me, a hollowness I hadn't anticipated. What was I supposed to do now? What was the point of all this if I was left standing alone, with nothing but the wreckage of my past? The desire for vengeance had been my compass, guiding me through the darkest moments, but now that the storm had passed, I wasn't sure where I stood. I had gotten my revenge, yes, but what did that make me? Did I want to be the kind of man who lived for retribution? Or was there something more? I wasn't sure if I would ever be the same. How could I be? How could I erase what I had seen, what I had felt? The betrayal had been too deep. It had chipped away at who I was, and no matter what I did, I knew I would never feel completely whole again. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I was free. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, my peace of mind, and that was worth something. Sophie thought she had planned everything perfectly. She thought she had all the pieces in place, that she had calculated every move. But in the end, it was her who paid the price. Her plan had been flawed from the start because she underestimated me. And in doing so, she lost everything she thought she could gain. As for Daniel, well, his life was in ruins. His ex-wife, with the help of the authorities, exposed his every dirty secret. His career was gone, his reputation obliterated, and his relationships with friends and family shattered. He was left with nothing but the consequences of his own choices. I could hear the desperation in his voice when he called me. He begged me to understand, to reconsider, to not press charges, but it was too late for that. I had no mercy left to give him, but it didn't end there. What struck me the most wasn't his downfall, it was Sophie's. As she watched everything she had built crumble, she found herself alone, with no one to turn to, no one who would listen. The mask she had worn so well for years had been ripped off, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She thought she could manipulate the world around her, but in the end, it was her own manipulation that destroyed her. I still think about them, about the people they were and the wreckage they left in their wake. But I also think about the man I was before all of this and the man I am now. In some ways, I'm stronger. I've learned that I can't control the actions of others, but I can control how I respond to them. The past will always be there, but it no longer defines me. It's a part of my story, yes, but it doesn't have to be my whole story. For now, I'm moving forward. Sophie and Daniel may have thought they could destroy me, but I walked away with everything that mattered: my life, my freedom, and my ability to rebuild. It took time to get here, but I'm finally ready to start again. The reckoning is over. The aftermath has arrived. And with it, I've come out on the other side wiser, more cautious, but free. Now that you've heard the story, what do you think? Do you have any thoughts, feelings, or feedback to share? I'd love to hear what you think, so feel free to leave a comment below. And hey,
Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you can be the first to catch the next story. Your support means the world to me, and I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to listen. Thank you for being here, and I can't wait to share more with you soon.